Thank you, President Motlanthe, for a very interesting lecture on the role of education as an equalizer and also the role of education in terms of economic development of a country like South Africa. I will take the privilege of being the chairman of this discussion to start off with the first question. And maybe it's a very minor thing, but obviously, as the president of a university, I was listening to you when you were talking about the fact that universities in South Africa need to go to a major transformation. But what we've seen here in the press, be it here or be it in the international press, was recently quite a few strikes, demonstrations by students who actually were asking for free education. Mm-hmm. Is this something of the, I mean, obviously this is part of the equal access to education, and I do understand some of that sort of the drive by some of these students. But does this fit in your view of what education can do to South Africa?
Well, thank you for the question. I was speaking at a function organized by the University of Stellenbosch, and during the interactive session, the question was put to me as to whether the notion of free education does exist or not. And in my answer, I explained that there's a rationale behind the demand made by students at tertiary level, and it is because the majority of them come from poor family backgrounds which can barely afford to pay even the current fees for their education. And so and these in the main are middle class families, and when the local municipality raises the rates that families have to pay for refuse removal, for water, for electricity, and so on, it immediately pushes most of these middle class families into a debt trap situation. And therefore, the children who are at tertiary level feel this pressure quite acutely, and that is why they feel they should do what they can by demanding that education should actually be free. But of course, in life, nothing is free. You know, if you are to give anybody anything, it entails sacrifice. You must sacrifice something. You must sacrifice time or something for you to be able to help anybody or even help yourself. That is why we thought it best that you know, it should be made very clear that the establishment of NSFAS, which is a fund that helps the cohort of university students who cannot afford, whose parents cannot afford, in the form of loans, which are converted into full bursaries once they complete their studies. And so in exchange for free education, the students must ensure that they actually progress, they pass and acquire their degrees. Then the loan is converted into a bursary. Now, if, of course, as I explained, the students take longer. For a 3-year or 4-year degree, the first year is lost because it's almost like acclimatization year. For most of them, they have to repeat the first year because basic education would not have prepared them well enough for them to make, the requisite progress. So these students then, the ones that are, cannot afford and are deserving of the assistance, then said, no, we want education to be free for everybody. And the vice chancellors were trying to explain to them that no, the students whose parents can afford to pay, allow them to pay. And these students say, no, this is a divide and rule strategy. You want to break our solidarity, because they were all involved in these demonstrations in support of the demand for free or for fees to fall. And so they flatly refused to entertain the view that, yes, indeed, the deserving and poor ones will benefit, in the manner I've explained. They say, no, it must be for everybody. And so, of course, that led to a deadlock. A commission was then established to examine the nitty-gritties of how this funding of tertiary education should be handled. The report was submitted to the president in August by the commission. I'm not up to date as to where the matter is now, but that's the reality.
I'll open up for questions from the room, but when you ask a question, please keep it short. We have the speaker here, not in the room, and please introduce yourself. Any questions? Yeah, Pauline.
It made me appreciate my education a lot.
I think the microphone doesn't work.
My voice is so loud.
No, not enough. We need...
Hello? Can you hear me? No?
I'm sorry, Pauline.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. Oh, wow, so loud.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Your sharing has made me appreciate my own education a lot. I think in Singapore we have sometimes forgotten that education is such a privilege. May I ask you 2 questions? The first is to follow up on President Arnott's question, and that is on the youth of South Africa, your students, the undergraduates. What is their aspiration for South Africa? It's come through such a difficult time. What do university students hope to see in their South Africa? And my second question has to do with your reference to science and math, and I'm a sociologist, right? So what is the role of social sciences in the universities in South Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. It's hard to say what the aspirations of the university students is with regards to the direction and future of South Africa, because essentially every family tries to get their children into tertiary institutions to get them to come out with a university qualification in the belief that it would make them or enhance their chances of being employable. So it's primarily informed by the fortunes of the family and the individual student, that he or she would have improved station in life and in society once they hold a university qualification. Earlier on in our discussions with Arnold, I explained to him that in a city like Johannesburg, a qualified plumber, literally, patched on the refrigerators in every kitchen, you will find the contact numbers of a plumber, mobile and otherwise. But the general thinking is that literally every child must become an academic. And so there's very few people with hard skills to do real work, not theorize about work and so on. So the students, in my assessment, they are not trained to come out of college and university in order to create work. They are job seekers, and they believe that the university qualifications would locate them in the head of the queue of job seekers. That's the general attitude. Social science is very important because it helps to understand society, how society is structured, how society must, be imbued with certain values. So that's the importance of social science. And of course, the creatives in the humanities are very important. They play a very important role in the sense that, they can create a reality which does not exist yet, and therefore inspire society to pursue that reality. And at some point, that reality is attained. Science and mathematics are important because whether you're going to become a plumber or you're going to become a carpenter or you're going to become a banker, the mathematics teaches you to reason logically. But also, of course, you need to know how to measure. Otherwise, you would end up producing a table with one leg too short or one leg too long, and so on. So it's important from that point of view. And of course, innovation comes from experiments that scientists conduct in trying to find cures to diseases that decimate society and to improve on instruments of production. So both play a very important role. You can't have a society made up of scientists and mathematicians only. You need the social sciences for them to understand that we're not just individuals, but we are society precisely because we work for each other. in our small corners. But essentially, as a society, we work for each other. Thank you.
Any other question? Yeah, I have one there.
Hi, I'm Phoebe, and I would like to ask if, because I understand that it's ideal for children to, for all the students in Africa to become academic, but for those students who, like, they just finished their primary school education and they have taken the national exams, but they do not have enough money to continue their education. So what do you think they should do? Because what if they don't have the skills, enough skills to, they don't have enough skills to get them properly employed, and when they get out to the society, they are still young and they meet with a lot, like those evils in the society. So what do you think they can do if they are unable to continue their education?
Yeah.
It raises the larger question of what you do with a large population of young people who are not necessarily well trained, right? Well educated.
Well, the Department of Higher Education and Training tries to offer such young people a second chance by offering them free passage into what we call further training and further education and training institutions, where they can learn hard skills in the various departments that are supported by corporate companies, because the automotive industry, for instance, in South Africa, would offer such young people the opportunity, to train them as motor mechanics, as well as, painters. And these days, there's no panel beating. The cars are no longer panel beated because the parts are there to replace the parts and fit new parts. These days, if a car gets involved in an accident, they literally dismantle the parts that are damaged and replace them with new ones. So the several industries offer those kinds of training opportunities for students who would have gone up to grade 9 or 10. They are given those second chances. Yeah.
What is the level of youth unemployment currently in South Africa?
Well, at the last count, we had upward of 3 million young people between the ages of 15 and 24 who were neither in any institute of learning or any job. So, you have that cohort of young people not learning, not being trained, not in any job. Yeah.
How do you give them hope? These people who have no job and no training and yet have a lifetime in front of them.
Yes.
What?
Well, that's part of the nub of the problem that we face as a country, in the sense that our economy last year, the projection of the growth of the economy was put at 1.7%. But during the midterm budget policy statement, it was revised almost downwards by 50% to 0.7% growth. So the economy is not growing at the rate at which it can absorb the new entrants into the labor market, and hence this high unemployment. How do we give them hope? it's precisely to ensure that you know, they are absorbed in the second opportunities given to them. Some of them, you know, are offered opportunities to participate in sporting academies because they may be good at one sporting code or the other, and therefore make it in the sporting sector. But by and large, they remain as a reserve army, you know, literally to be mobilized into action. And this is why we end up with so many social upheavals and demonstrations, because they have the energy and, you know, if all it takes is for, you know, a minor issue to be raised as a social problem. But they also, you know, become recruited by criminal gangs, you see, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yes, I have one over there. That I will take first the question over there and then the one here. It seems that our technology doesn't work.
Yeah.
Thanks for the inspiring sharing so far. I can relate quite well. Actually, science and technology has been able to change my life, such as like knowing the programming, coding, and coming up with application. So I'm just curious, like in terms of like, because you have mentioned throughout your speeches, like how science and technology can move the society forward. So in your opinion, what are some of the best ways to introduce these like hard skills to the group of people, especially maybe also to the unemployed, like the 3 million youths? Yeah.
How do you prepare best people for science and technology? Is it in normal schools, or are there other ways of introducing them to science and technology?
Well, you know, literacy and numeracy must be inculcated during the formative years. And so what we have are early childhood development centers. And that's where the natural latent talents are more or less identified, the strong points. And the basic education system has got two streams. The one stream is one that leads to academic careers, and the other is one that leads to, you know, people training as artisans and acquiring those hard skills here.
But in science and technology, or in the field that you're referring to in programming, IT, we actually see now that universities get competition from short boot camps where students learn in 3 months what we normally would teach in 2 years. Maybe not that bad, but there are alternatives to uplift a group of people into skills such as IT, and maybe that's what you're referring to.
Yes, well, the Human Resource Development Council that I alluded to was made up of government, representatives, but in the main, people who come from industry, because the understanding is that, the best training happens on the shop floor. And because if it's theoretical only, you can only learn how to draw and calculate. But to really get to understand, and qualify as an electrician, you got to be exposed to the National Electrical Company, which would then take you in as an apprentice, and that's how people acquire those skills here.
I have a
Thank
question
you.
here.
Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Katiana from from Singapore's Ministry of National Development. Thank you for the educational afternoon. My question is about migration of students going overseas to study, and how much of a challenge is it to attract South African students to come back to South Africa, and sort of what strategies have been implemented to try and help students come back and integrate into the workforce.
Okay.
Shall we, there was another question there, maybe I should take that one too, and then those will be the two last questions.
Hi, my name is Kai.
Maybe you could stand up,
Yep.
because we don't see. I have a third one there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kai. So my question is, and maybe some of the context you shared was around some of the outcomes and challenges you face in the primary, secondary, and tertiary level of education. So my question is centered around early childhood education. What do you see is the relevance of early childhood education in South Africa, and how important is that to drive and improve some of the outcomes at the primary, tertiary, and secondary level?
So the importance of early childhood education for the further forms of education. I had one question over there. I'm going to limit it to one question.
Sadly, I have a two-part question, but it's just the one in reality. So Kevin Hardy, I'm a guest here. So President Motlanthe, thank you very much for your stirring lecture. It left me thinking a couple of things, and the first one related to the rate of progress so far with the improvement in education in South Africa, and how long at the current rate do you think it will take before you reach an acceptable level for education for the nation? And then the second part of the question is really touching upon immigration. And that often is an accelerator of economic development within all countries. And how much of a role does that play in your thinking in helping to develop and improve the socio-economic situation within South Africa? Thank you.
So I guess we have three types of questions. There's questions around migration, the question how the migration stimulates the economic development, but also how do you get the students back, right? When they study overseas. The second one around the role of the early childhood education and how that influences the rest. And then sort of taking stock of how well are you doing for the moment, and how long will it take before you reach an acceptable level. Shall we limit it to these three?
Yeah, but you had the second question.
The second question was about migration, the role of migration in...
Okay,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
So that's the reason why I bundled them.
Thank you, thank you. Well, let's start with the migration of students. Many parents in South Africa who are educated, who are professionals, tend to allow their children to acquire junior degrees locally in South Africa. But for masters and PhDs, they then send them, abroad to either UK or the USA or the Scandinavian countries or to Germany. And it is then left to, because the parents themselves are professionals, it is then left to those students, once they've acquired the qualifications, to also gain experience. So the trend is for them to get employment with transnational companies or transnational financial institutions. And only once they've worked there for years and have, in a sense, stabilized, would they then consider coming back to South Africa, to take up certain jobs and so on. But there are others, who went abroad, acquired the highest qualifications, and come back to South Africa to, in a sense, plow back, what experience they gained and establish ways of assisting young people who would otherwise not have had the same exposure that they had. That's the trend. But we rarely ever have, students who emigrate permanently. For some reason, they always come back at one point or the other. Yeah. ECD's centers are very important because they, in a sense, help young people to learn how to read and write. So by the time they get to register as students, or rather pupils in the primary school, they already are into the system of trying to learn. And because at that age, young people are very inquisitive and they are very keen to explore and get to absorb new information. So these days, with all these iPhones and modern gadgets, they are terrific. I mean, I'm always amazed at the level of general knowledge that these young people have about global issues and so on. They may not know how to interpret things, but I must say, they are streets ahead of where we were at their age, because we had to read newspapers. They Google and that kind of thing. Yeah. So the foundation is laid at ECD for their progress later, in education. The Statistician General issued a report. He issues reports on a regular basis. He issued a report in 2011 about, as I said, the way education was used in South Africa. It followed a hierarchy of national groups. So the white section of the South African population, the schools which originally were mission schools, were retained in the white communities. But in the African communities, those mission schools were shut down in the 50s and replaced by public schools. And the way Bantu education was engineered was by taking over teacher training colleges. And so the approach was to produce teachers who would produce learners and citizens to become hewers of wood and drawers of water, and not to be productive in the economy. And so, because it was through the teachers, we still sit today with products of that system. And hence, the report, as I said, of the Department of Basic Education says that states very clearly that the teachers are unable to teach these learners to solve problems or to read independently and so on. So, and so the Statistician General in 2011 says enrollment at grade R, which is the entry level, is 96%, which means access is being opened up, for young children to enter the schooling system. And he says if you track that same cohort of learners over a 12-year period, which is when they're supposed to be sitting down for grade 12 examinations, which is matriculation, he says only 22% go through grade 12. So from 96% to 22%, it means there's a 72% which drops out somewhere between those years. And this affects mainly the Africans, because he says in that report that the education in the white community is doing fine, and in the Indian community is doing very well, but it's the Africans that are affected negatively in that fashion. And the reason for it is because the caliber of teachers are not, there are exceptions of course to the rule, but the systemic weakness remains in place. And therefore, to solve this problem, once and for all, we must open teacher training colleges, invest in recruiting the best teacher trainers, and aim to produce the best teachers. Then we would have solved the problem. Once that system gets to reproduce itself, we would have solved that problem. But for now, that is a dead weight in our national education system. Migration adds value because you get. I think my mic is gone.
Yes, no, it's still working.
Because you get, like I'm referring to teacher trainers, those we can only recruit and get through migration. In fact, the entire fabric of the South African population today is like a microcosm of the United Nations. When we speak of the South African nation, we literally refer to people from all over. We've had French Huguenots sent to South Africa, and so part of the culture of wine making and so on actually came with the French Huguenots, who were migrants, who sought refuge from the British Crown. And at that time, South Africa was a colony of Britain, and so Britain sent them to South Africa. We've had, descendants of Indian slaves and indentured laborers. Hence, we have a huge population of, in fact, the largest population of Indians outside of India is in South Africa. We've had Irish people, English people who came as fortune hunters in the mining industry. We've got Polish people, we've got literally everybody. When we were hosting the FIFA World Cup, all the 31 nations that came to play had their supporters from sections of the South African population who happened to be descendants of those nations. So migration from that point of view is very, very important, in enhancing the capacity of any nation. And so in South Africa, by and large, we welcome people to our country, and the ones that want to settle. From time to time you have tensions arising when people from Somalia open up small convenient shops in the townships. So from time to time, the local thugs get to know that this person is not documented, and therefore cannot have a banking account, and so they attack them, for the reason that they believe they keep money, under the mattress and so on. Yeah.
President Motlanthe, I'm tempted to ask a bit of a cheeky question as a last question.
Please do.
Who is going to be the next president of South Africa?
Yeah. Well, it's a bit too early to know, because the elections are only going to happen in 2019, and you must remember that our electoral system is proportional representation. So it's not individuals who contest elections, but political parties.
So you will know beforehand, because you will know who will be the president of the ANC.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So you cannot avoid the question by saying it's going to take 2 years. It's not going to take 2 years.
No, that is possible, but but of course, for the president of the ANC to be elected as president of the republic, it means the ANC must have the majority in parliament, because presidents are elected by parliamentarians.
I guess I will not get the answer. President Motlanthe, it's always difficult to summarize at this stage of what you have said, and I will refer back to what we will probably publish on it on our website. But there's always a few things that get stuck in my mind, and as a sort of interesting insights. And I think that one of the things that I pick up was the role of an educational system, not only education, but an educational system in structuring a society, the negative role that it can play, as it did with apartheid, but also the positive role if you want to transform a society. The education as an equalizer is another sort of phrase that I pick up from what you said. Of course, being a president of university, I was listening very carefully what you had to say about universities in South Africa, but what I picked up there was also universities cannot be isolated from the society in which they operate. They are working in a particular context, and they have to serve that context. And in that context, universities have a role in guiding and propelling society forward, and need to take on that role. I heard your plea for science and mathematics, but then your acceptance of social sciences as sciences that help us to understand how societies are structured. I also hope, and I know there are a few students in the room, that listening to President Motlanthe will have given you the interest, or the curiosity to go and explore what's possible in South Africa. I think it's a place with an enormous amount of opportunities, especially for students and young people here from this part of the world, Southeast Asia, Singapore in particular. And I think, I hope that, I have to admit that one of the reasons why I was happy that I could invite you is that this way I bring African continent and South Africa in particular a little bit more to SMU and to our students. Can I ask you for a warm round of applause for